Hi, this is Remembering the Past with Corey Franklin, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with Walt Bellamy, who died at the age of 74. What a wonderful ball player Walt Bellamy was. He was one of the great centers in basketball history, and he played in the era of the golden age of great centers, including Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Nate Thurmond, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Artis Gilmore. He played in the cradle of basketball at Indiana University for the great coach Branch McCracken in the late 50s, and I saw him play as a little boy in the 1960s as a rookie with the Chicago Packers, where he averaged 32 points and 19 rebounds. Ironically, his rookie season in Chicago was his best ever in the NBA. He bounced around after that to the Knicks, the Pistons, and the Hawks. He was traded from the Knicks to the Pistons for Dave DeBusschere, which was key in the 1970 Knicks championship team, and he ended his career in Atlanta. But he was a four-time MVP, and he's in the Basketball Hall of Fame. His biggest claim to fame in basketball, though, is on the 1960 Olympic basketball team, which many people consider our greatest ever. America has three memorable Olympic basketball teams: the Dream Team in 1992 with Michael Jordan and all those pros who dominated everybody, but they were professionals. The 72 team that lost to the Russians in the controversial game, and the 1960 team that had Walt Bellamy, a couple of guards named Oscar Robertson and Jerry West, and some other really good players, including Bob Boozer and Jerry Lucas. And that team was as dominant in its day as the Dream Team was, and they were all amateurs. Walt Bellamy ended his career in Atlanta, as I said before, and he started to do civil rights work. Here's an Atlanta interview with him where he talks about his experience with the 1960 Olympic team.
Good day and welcome back to the Herbert Denard Show. I have with me a legend in basketball and a person that's been involved in the civil rights movement in Atlanta and all over Georgia. I'm talking about a Hall of Famer, Walter Bellamy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. And it's a privilege and a pleasure to be in your company this evening.
Let me ask you this now. You played center with the 1960 Olympic team. They had Oscar Robertson at point guard, and they didn't call it point guard then. They had Jerry West as the shooting guard. They had one powerful team, and these were all college players. What's your comments on that?
My comment on it, I heard, was that the media, basketball pundits, came out with the fact when another later team and
the Dream Team. This was the Dream Team.
This was the authentic Dream Team because we got no compensation. We were truly amateurs on that team. And if you don't mind, I'll take you to the other players on that team was Jerry Lucas, Burla Hollison, who played in AAU. They had to take two guys from the AAU, and Al Lane. We had Odie Smith, who also was in the service. They took a person from the service, and Bob Boozer, who played at Kansas State. That aggregation of players won by greater margins than 20. Now, there are going to be some information or maybe even some results that, and when we were preparing to go to Rome, the Cleveland Pipers, who were members of the ABA, I think, defeated us. And, of course, I'm sure they want to recycle that. But when we went to the competition, then I like to think that we were the best team that has ever played basketball. Now, obviously, I would get some comment, but I certainly want to use that as an editorial based on the results of the 1960 Olympic team.
That was one heck of a team. You think of Oscar Robertson, Magic Johnson. How do you compare them?
Well, I try not, and I will not compare any players. Magic was good in his era. Oscar, because I played with him, was better during that era. Why? Because Oscar, in addition to his basketball ability and his professionalism, also coached and directed the team on the floor. And that's something that's invaluable. That's not to say that our coaching wasn't adequate, but he knew where every player should go in order for him to get the ball to that player. And so I would not attempt to compare Mr. Johnson with Mr. Robinson, as I would only say that during my era, he was the best basketball player during my career.
He was super now. Yeah. Now, when you played center, you played against Wilt Chamberlain.
That's correct.
Bill Russell, Nate Thurmond, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Correct.
And you held your own with all of them.
Well, it's a competitive game, and we were all professionals. I relish the fact that you bring it up, or if anyone bring it up, because those were truly centers who played the game. And more specifically, during that period, you didn't have a player playing 20 minutes or a center playing 18 minutes and then coming in for 12 minutes. They played the entire game. And so one of the aspects I find in that they were the best conditioned athletes in all professional sports because they played 48 minutes. And they had to do a lot of physical touch and pushing and shoving, which again is part of the game. But they, again, or myself was privileged to have played for 12 years and not have sustained a serious injury. And I would attribute that to my training, to obviously to the fact that I'm playing against players of equal talent and ability. So that encouraged you to take care of your system, take care of your body, so that you would be at its best.
Walt Bellamy, I remember him as a nice guy, a wonderful player, a well-spoken guy, and a member of one of the underpublicized teams of all time. I'd like to move on to a local legend, Charlie Trotter, who died recently at the age of 54. And Charlie Trotter was one of the legendary chefs in the United States. He ran restaurants, he wrote cookbooks, he was on television, he was an all-around celebrity, and his restaurants were acclaimed worldwide and put Chicago on the restaurant map. He was born in Wilmette, which is where this podcast is coming from now, so he was born not too far from here. Went to New Trier High School, where my kids went to, and he was actually a poli-sci major at Wisconsin. But once he got into the culinary arts, he became a master. He was a little bit of a mercurial sort, but there's no denying he was legendary. Here's the Chicago Tribune writing about the death of Charlie Trotter on the editorial page. In an editorial entitled The Death of the Chef, Charlie Trotter's Chicago Legacy. With the stunning death of Charlie Trotter, Chicago has lost one of its great cultural figures and one of its great business leaders. The man known to many simply as Chef had an impact that stretched far beyond his kitchen. He was an artist in every way, at times personable, at times insufferable, always passionate, always a creative force. When he announced that Charlie Trotter's restaurant in Lincoln Park would close last year, fans flocked to it for one last meal, as though the Art Institute or the Jazz Showcase or the Sears, sorry Willis folks, Tower were about to disappear. Singular institutions such as Charlie Trotter's make Chicago a destination for the world and give Chicagoans immense pride in knowing they live in a special place. He was indeed a character. He launched the foie gras wars when he said producing the delicacy was a grisly process and took it off his menu, but he rightly ripped the city council when it moved to impose a government ban. Chicago embraced him in all his tempestuousness. After all, Chicago has never expected its geniuses to be mild-mannered. He was indeed a chef. Chicago had its share of famous restaurants before Trotter burst into prominence a quarter century ago, but it was still something of a second city in gourmet circles. Trotter added seasonal dining with ingredients geared to the changing weather, tasting menus featuring multiple courses with wine pairings, and fabulously varied meals made of raw ingredients that exuded freshness and purity. He was an improviser whose dictum was never to repeat a dish. He trained some of the best chefs in the world. His philanthropic foundation championed culinary education and other causes. Charlie Trotter did nothing less than help to build and sustain Chicago as a world-class city. We celebrate his profound accomplishments. We're going to close tonight with Robert Rheault, who died recently at the age of 87. And Robert Rheault was the consummate Green Beret soldier. The Green Berets were the Special Forces unit, the elite that we used in Vietnam to go on missions that were outside of the general military control. They were generally undertaken by very talented and resourceful, educated soldiers, and they were often in very mysterious places. They didn't report to anybody, and you never knew what was going on. Those Green Berets gave them a romantic, dashing flair. It was a real 1960s Vietnam thing, and Robert Rheault certainly fit the bill. He was educated at Exeter and West Point. He won a bronze medal in Korea, spoke fluent French. He got a master's degree at GW. And he was sent to Vietnam in the early part of the war in 1964 as a Green Beret, and he was doing all sorts of mysterious stuff. He came back to the States, and he was sent back to Vietnam in 1968 at the height of the war, and he was in command of 4,500 Special Forces. For a while, it looked like he might become the head of the whole Green Beret operation. Then in 1969, he was undone. Apparently what happened was a number of his men had a military translator who was Vietnamese, and it turned out that the military translator was probably a Viet Cong spy. They killed him unbeknownst to Robert Rheault, although when he found out about it, he covered it up When he was asked about it by Creighton Abrams, the top military honcho in Vietnam, this created all sorts of legal problems, and it got back to the States, and it was around the time of the My Lai massacres, a little before that. But it was a huge deal, and they're going to put those guys on trial, and they're going to put him on trial, and finally the Congress just sort of shut it down. But it really gave the military a black eye, and it ended his career. I think the Secretary of the Army or somebody high up like that said during the whole thing, you know, in the Army, we don't tolerate murder. So you can see what kind of moral conflicts we were going through at the time. In fact, not only did this episode ruin his military career and his marriage, it was the stimulus for Daniel Ellsberg to release the Pentagon Papers. It's too bad more people don't know about it today. Last 40 years of his life, he joined Outward Bound, which was a military leadership program, and he helped out with the Vietnam vets who had PTSD. He did a little more with the military, but he said the Green Beret case is not what I am about. He still maintained a profound sense of military duty, even while acknowledging the ambiguities of war. Here, when he was 85 years old, he was invited to talk at a school on Veterans Day.
Well, you know, Veterans Day, was originally Armistice Day because on 11/11/11, the 11th hour of the 11th day, the 11th month, the guns fell silent in Europe. I think my father, who was there in the front lines, probably appreciated that. Anyway, I think it's appropriate that we should take some time on Veterans Day or close to Veterans Day to honor those who served, who have served, and some who may serve in the future. The term serve is something I'd like to come back to. It's not unusual to ask an old soldier, and at 85, I am indeed an old soldier, to come and speak on Veterans Day or Memorial Day, and sometimes to beat the drum and wave the flag and talk of patriotism and all of that good stuff. But I'm afraid I'm not that guy. There's a myth, I think, that soldiers love war. And I'm here to tell you that's simply not so. For those who've actually experienced combat, war is a terrible reality. I think for many, war is an abstraction, born perhaps of bad movies, raunchy television, cheap novels, parades, flag waving, statues of handsome generals sitting on top of great big horses, waving their swords, and all of that sort of good stuff. I worried something about Ronald Reagan, whose view of war was probably formed by his acting in Hollywood movies where you shoot blanks and then go out and have drinks together afterwards. That's not the reality. I think perhaps the best memorial to war is in Washington, D.C., where Maya Lane's wall is hundreds of feet of polished black marble on which are inscribed some 58,000 names of those who fell in combat.
In the 1979 movie Apocalypse Now, the role Marlon Brando played of Colonel Kurtz was based in part on the character Kurtz from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness and based in part on Robert Rheault. Here are Martin Sheen and Marlon Brando as Martin Sheen goes upriver to get the rogue intelligence agent, Kurtz.
They say why? Well, why they want to terminate my command? I was sent on classified missions. No longer classified. Did they tell you? They told me that you had gone totally insane and that your methods were unsound.
Of course, the irony is that Robert Rheault wasn't insane, and in all likelihood his methods were probably sound. I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. Final tribute to Robert Rheault is going to come from an unlikely source, Dolly Parton. She's going to sing the song that was the #1 hit for Sergeant Barry Sadler in 1966 when the Green Berets were still our heroes.
The guys in Special Forces are usually the first ones into a war and often the last ones out. Imagine going into a hostile country, lightly armed and with just a few men. What they do is so secret they never get the recognition they deserve. And this is one time I want them to know they're appreciated. Fighting soldiers from the sky, fearless men who jump and die, men who mean just what they say, the brave men of the Green Beret. Silver wings upon their chests,